Hey, what's up, and welcome to this episode of EST, the podcast for established church leaders by established church leaders. My name is Josh.
My name is Sam, and it's a special episode. Don't forget that.
Welcome to
bonus.
this special episode of EST.
Bonus.
Yeah.
We're giving our listeners what they pay for.
That's good, because it's a very affordable price.
Yeah. Actually, the reason that it's affordable and the reason that we can do this is because of Southern Seminary. And we have Dr. Justin Irving on the show with us today. He is professor of leadership at Southern. He has got a ton of good thoughts to share with us, particularly about toxic churches, which I know is something that can be a pain point for a lot of pastors. I've been there. I know, Josh, you've been there. But Justin, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much. It's a joy to be with y'all.
Yeah, we're really glad that you're here. I'm curious, if you're listening to a show like this, maybe it was a sponsorship, maybe there's all kinds of things. I'm just curious how we would define a toxic church. Like on Monday mornings, I think 100% of us think we're serving at a toxic church, or a lot of people do. But how do you define a toxic church? Either of you?
Well, let's get there. But first, we got to get to the spot. We got to tell everyone to go to SBTS.edu /6 questions. You definitely want to get a hold of these 6 questions. You are leading others at home, you're leading others at work, in your ministry, but how are you leading yourself? So you, these organizational heads have to rightly prioritize God in their personal lives before they can more effectively lead others in their professional lives. So take the test. So Southern's got this great test. So take the test right now. Go over to sbts.edu /6 questions, and you can pretty much spell that however you want because they've got all the links set up. You also find the link in the show notes. But I also want to mention that you need to go, what it'll do is it'll take you to a landing page, and you can learn about their programs in leadership. They've got a DMin in church leadership. They've got a DMin in executive leadership. They've got all sorts of leadership programs. Justin oversees a lot of that, and it is worth your while. So thank you, Southern, the Southern Baptist Theological Seminary. I am a graduate, and I certainly love their programs. We certainly want you to go check them out. This diagnostic test is really, really good. So go to sbts.edu /6 questions and go check it out. All right, Justin, you're in Norton Hall. You're sitting there on this podcast. I have to tell you, I know the building and I know the grounds very well. I used to mow the yard outside of your window.
There it is.
That's what I used to do. Now, our listeners may not know that. I went to high school in Louisville. My dad was at Southern. I went to Southern. You're at Southern. So we're glad to have you on the show. And we're talking about toxic churches. Josh has a question. How do you define a toxic church? What does that even mean? When we say toxic, Justin, help us out.
Yeah, my interest is not so much in nailing down every nuance of the toxic side, but to emphasize the opposite. We need healthy leaders. We need healthy pastors to be able to work, whether they're in a healthy congregation or a toxic congregation. And so I think we all find ourselves bumping up against organizations that there's a smell of things not working well, and it could be at a personal level, the type of people that are at the helm leading things. It also could be in the way we're structured and organized. But the need to push into the health is the side of the equation I'm especially interested in.
So if a deacon tries to kill you, if you're the lead pastor, does that count as a toxic situation?
I think so. Maybe you all would have to speak to that. I've never had that experience myself.
Well, I have. Yeah. That's a whole nother story. It involved a firearm and the police department. And yeah, it was a bit of a toxic situation. Now, maybe others aren't in quite as extreme a situation. But Josh, I don't know, what do you think? What do you think? When you hear of people in toxic situations, I mean, what does that look like?
I mean, for me, I think there's just it's important, and I think that Dr. Irving is making a great point there. But it's important for us to realize, just because it's hard doesn't mean it's toxic. And I think in our culture now, everything that's against what I want is toxic. And so that we want to set that kind of definition aside. But if you are in an environment in which the systems, the structures, and the leadership is producing more death than life, then that's what I would call toxic. And so if you're running through staff, you've got this constant turnover, or you have this constant killing and creating of ministries, if members are coming in and out constantly, and it's not just that it's transient growth, it's really like constant battles and constant dead bodies behind the bus, if you want to steal that phrase, then those would be
I know where you
toxic
got
cultures.
that phrase. I see what you just
This
did.
is the only podcast I ever listened to. And so if that's what's happening, that's toxic. Now, I think what we could talk about this morning is going to help in both settings, whether you're in a healthy church or a toxic church. I think just from the beginning, what I want to say to our listeners is just because it's hard doesn't make it toxic. But this stuff could help you in a number of settings.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so toxicity, I think, can come either from the congregation or the leadership, right? So let's first say that, or both, that sometimes you have a toxic church because you have toxic leaders. Sometimes you have a toxic church because you have a toxic power group in the church, or you just have a lot of unhealthy people in the church. So toxicity can come from the congregation. Toxicity can come from the leadership. Justin, you're a professor of leadership. This is something that you study all the time. You're in churches. I mean, what would you say is like the primary problem when it comes to toxicity in churches?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think when people are not taking care of themselves the way they need to, they're not nurturing health in their own lives. We might put it just as health begets health, so toxicity is going to beget toxicity. We spread these things to those around us, for better or worse. And so much of what I'm focused on, at least about my work here at Southern, is calling people to take responsibility for what they can take responsibility for, and that is themselves, their direct teams, the people that they're working with. And so leaning into our own stewardship responsibilities to ensure that we can't change everybody, but are we ensuring that we're leaning into health in the realm that we're responsible for? And that's hard work. The work of self-leadership is not something that comes easy for everybody, but it is, if we're not doing that well, we're going to land in lots of toxic situations.
So let's kind of pivot here a little bit, and let's talk about health. Because, toxicity is the problem. Health is the solution. Obviously, more of the focus needs to be on the solution than the problem. So what does a healthy pastor look like? And if Josh and I were to be evaluated by you, not that you're I don't know, you may be a counselor, I don't know, maybe I should talk to you, but if you were to academically evaluate Josh and I, what would you say is, all right, here's what a healthy pastor needs to do, here's what a healthy pastor needs to look like?
I think in some ways it overlaps with what you pointed us to a bit earlier in those 6 categories or 6 questions, right? Are we thinking about our lives holistically? There's the reality is we are not people who are just leading intellectual lives or just leading lives that are practical in nature. We need to think about spiritual health, emotional health, relational health, intellectual health, the whole of our being. And I think especially if we just lean into the first 3 of those, right? If we're not attending well to the spiritual dynamics of our lives, leaning into dependence on the gospel, leaning into our own growth, people smell out inauthenticity in spiritual lives in the church context. And same might be with the emotional side of things, right? If we are not paying attention to our own emotional well-being, we're lacking a capacity to be able to lean into the anxiousness of the systems that we're part of, the relationships that we're part of. And health is involved in the emotional side with people who are able to maintain a calm, non-anxious presence in the face of difficulty and toxicity around them. And I'd be looking for a deep and abiding relationship with Christ. I'd be looking for someone who's able to maintain a calm and non-anxious presence in the face of difference. And I'd also be looking for somebody who's not getting isolated relationally. My personal conviction is so many of the challenges that we see in churches and other organizations where leaders are failing in a number of different ways is they often get isolated over time, and they're not being held to deep and abiding relationships that support them in that process of health. So at least on three fronts, the kind of the spiritual dependency on Christ and the gospel, a sense of maintaining a calm, non-anxious presence, the sense of not getting isolated. Those would be some of the cues that I'm looking for in terms of health in leadership that's going to sustain them over the long haul.
I'm curious, Doctor, if you could help me. This is just coming to me, but you used a couple of words there. You used organic, or you used authentic. You talked a lot about relationships with Christ, relationship with other people. One of the things I've always struggled with in my own walk and how to express this and teach this to the people of our churches, to other pastors I'm coaching, is what I have found in my own life is disciplines really generate health. And so and it can be simple things. I remember when I was younger, I wanted to read one chapter of the Bible every day, one chapter of fiction every day, spend time with, at the time she was my fiance, for 1 hour. And I had these disciplines, these things, 100 push-ups. And it was all of this like physical, spiritual, emotional stuff. What's the bridge? Or do you have a way of helping me think through and others think through the connection between what feels like rogue obedience or disciplined actions and being organic and authentic and relational? How do those connect?
Yeah, well, it just reminds me of the beautiful metaphor that we hear from others in lots of things. The idea of like the trellis and the vine, right? What's the structure that's providing a context for life to flourish within and upon? And in some ways, that's the way I think about discipline, right? The approach to saying what are the rhythms of our life that aren't in and of themselves producing health. They're not in and of themselves producing life in us, but they provide a structure and a context for that to take place. You talked about even just simple things from your childhood of saying, I want to read a chapter of Scripture. That kind of priority and structure doesn't go away when people suddenly appear in leadership roles. There needs to be a discipline of returning to these things. I think about even the way Paul speaks of those realities in like 1 Timothy 4, when he's talking about the priority of staying connected to the teaching, staying connected to teaching. The language of immersing ourselves in these things is present there. And that's not a one and done. That's a coming back to, pouring ourselves into what our first love needs to be. And we can fake things for some people in our lives. If we're leading people from afar, they can maybe not smell out the inauthenticity. But those closest to us know if we have a genuine love for God, passion for His Word, or whether this is just a hoop that we're jumping through for a professional view of ministry. And I think part of health is ensuring that we are teaching what we first treasure, right? That we are pointing people to something that actually is a deep joy and delight in our lives. I've been influenced by John Piper's ministry over the year. I served at Bethlehem Baptist for a time, and just that logic of delight in God, people can smell that out, whether that is real and authentic in our lives or not. And from my vantage point, that's kind of starting point number one for Christian leadership, is a genuine and abiding love for God that finds itself in the disciplines that you were pointing to.
So we're talking to Dr. Justin Irving of Southern Baptist Theological Seminary. He has these 6 dimensions that you need to go check out. It is a great diagnostic test. So you can go to SBTS.edu/6 questions. He mentioned the spiritual, the emotional, and the relational. There's also the physical, intellectual, and practical. So make sure you go look at that. It's free. SBTS.edu/6 questions. It'll also take you to a landing page to check out their leadership programs, particularly their D-Min in church leadership and the D-Min in executive leadership. if you've never been on the campus of Southern Seminary, it's probably, and I'm a bit biased because I graduated from there, but one of the most beautiful campuses on the planet. Now, these programs don't require you to be on campus. They're modular in nature. But if you can swing it, it's not going to be a bad thing to be there. And certainly when you're in the classroom, you're going to love it. So again, SBTS.edu/6questions. Okay, so let's connect this idea of I've got a problem. I'm in a toxic church. So I'm just going to go out and one of the things I hate to hear people say is I would never lead a church that I would not join. And I'm like, well, if that's the case, then no church is ever going to find a pastor. Because there's so many churches that need help that, like, good leaders, if that's the case, then they're never going to go to them. So let's say that you're like me. You're like, you know what? I'm going to go where God calls. And I know I'm getting into a tough situation. I know this is a revitalization. I know the people are going to be difficult. And so I hear it's toxic. I want to be a healthy leader. Day one, how do I do that?
Well, I alluded in some way to this already when talking about emotional health. This idea of being able to maintain a calm, non-anxious presence is rooted in the capacity. It's sort of this paradoxical capacity of how can I deeply and authentically love the people that I'm leading without being overly dependent on the praise or criticism that might be coming from those people. There has to be a sense of it is well with my soul, it is well with who I am relationally, to be able to push into unhealthy systems that need to be changed. I think that's from a day one perspective, knowing how we're grounded in our identity, that there can be this paradoxical relationship with genuinely loving and caring for the people, but not really caring for the shifting praise and criticism that might come our way.
Well, they're not going to give you praise. We know that. So let's just start there. Like, you go into a church is like, well, I'm not really going to expect much encouragement, but I can't let the criticism get to me either. And I think, a lot of people, and Josh, I kind of struggle with this. The people that think they're thick-skinned or claim they're thick-skinned typically are thin-skinned, right? So you do need to hide about shit. I kind of have to deal with the toxic situations. But at the same time, I guess any barb that someone throws at you is going to hurt. I mean, Josh, when the barbs come, what have you done to protect your soul from that?
Yeah, so, just taking a new church here, I've been here for 3 months, and they are overwhelmingly encouraging. In 3 months, there's not a single Sunday evening or Monday that I have not received 6-7 emails, text messages about the best sermon I've ever preached. All right, so that's phenomenal. All right?
How many have you preached?
Every one of them. It's the best one I've ever preached. And so what I have found, and I don't know if I don't know how to put this academically, or to kind of put it in that realm. However, what I found as I matured in my ministries was to appreciate and accept, like internally receive, when people are being gracious and kind to me. Early on in my ministry, I felt like thick skin and strong leadership was to reject both, to not listen to the encouragement and to give no weight or very little weight to the discouraging things. See if there's a nugget of truth. Accept that truth, reject the rest. But then when compliments came, I treated them the same way. I treated them like, is there a nugget of truth? No, of course not. I'm a wretched sinner, so that goes away. And so I would reject all of that. And as I've matured, I've learned to really appreciate and value the heart behind. Obviously, I am not preaching the best sermons ever in the history of preaching every single week, but instead listening for that desire to be encouraging and loving and receiving that. Because what I've found is there are seasons where they're not going to be that way anymore. And so be filled up. Let the good be filled in my deal. So I think that's kind of what you're talking about there, Sam. And what I would encourage people is, even in toxic churches, you're really battling it out with a committee or a board or something like that. There is still, in my experience, one or two folks that come back behind you and give you a pat on the back or say, hey, I know that was tough, but here's the thing. And in those moments, it's really easy to build a wall so that you're protecting yourself and you don't listen to the good either. And so I would really encourage people, one of the things about being healthy is just being filled up where God does send common grace and accepting that and enjoying the Christian community for its warts and its hugs.
Mm-hmm. It's beautiful.
So because we do have an academic with us, I think I want to press in a little bit into some theories here. So Max Weber came up with a theory in the 1940s called charismatic leadership, and very different than charismatic theology, right? A lot of people get those two things confused. They hear charismatic leader and they think they're speaking in tongues. That's not the case. Charismatic leadership is where the personality of the leader drives the follower. The ability for that leader to connect, even with someone they don't know, is why they follow. It's not even the content of the message or the structures that they're putting in place or their ability to make good decisions. It's the likability of the leader that draws people in. That's a very powerful tool, a very powerful ability. Not many people have it. There's a whole question in leadership theory: can you learn it, or is it just gifted to you? We don't have to go there for this podcast, but I'm curious. I'm curious to hear from somebody who's studied this. Is charismatic leadership one of the biggest reasons why we have so much toxicity in evangelical Christianity?
Mm-hmm. Well, my guess is by the question is you're making an assertion. You think that might be connected, and
potentially, yeah, I am. I'm leading you there. Yeah, I don't know. Yeah. I really don't know, but I have some suspicions that could be the case. Yeah,
sure. Yeah, when there is the presence of kind of a very engaging personality, charismatic personality, somebody that can carry things with the weight of who they are, not just what the agenda they bring to the table is, I do think there is a higher probability of toxicity that can come to the table. There's been a lot of discussions in the past year about the danger of preferencing charisma and competence over character. And I think that points to some of those challenges and dynamics. When we have somebody who's going to sort of carry the weight of things on the back of their personality, we're missing the opportunity to bring health beyond that charismatic influence. So like you brought up some theory, I think we need to bring in some other complements to that. So themes like transformational leadership theory, which has an element of that. We need a person to bring idealized influence to the table. They should be able to model the way. They should be a compelling example for other people. But there's more to it, right? It's seeing the individual and attending to that individual, inspiring them motivationally, helping to develop them by helping them to think well about their work. So we're getting at kind of the 4 eyes of transformational leadership there. And that's not setting aside charismatic leadership, but it's making sure that's not the only thing running the show, that we are empowering other people as we develop them and launch them into competent service themselves.
There you go. You pretty much just summarized Cousins and Posner and Leadership Challenge. So if you are interested in diving into the subject matter a little more deeply, that is a book that I highly recommend. If you have not read Leadership Challenge by Cousins and Posner, that is definitely one that you need to pick up. Certainly top 5 for me in leadership theory. I think that it was very, very well done. Well, hey, we're just about out of time. And so we try to land the plane. I'm usually one that struggles to land the plane, but certainly want to thank Justin for being on the show. We have another episode coming up. We're going to do 2 of these with Justin Irving and Southern Seminary. And again, thank you, Southern Seminary, for sponsoring today's episode. Again, they have this diagnostic tool, 6 dimensions, that you need to look at because there are these dimensions of personal leadership that you have to know about yourself. So go to SBTS.edu/6 questions. Look at those 6 questions. Use them to self-assess. I find them to be very intriguing. And also check out the D-Min in Church Leadership, the D-Min in Executive Leadership. You are going to have professors like Dr. Justin Irving, and you will not regret going to Southern Seminary to get either a D-Min in leadership, or I believe you also offer a PhD in leadership. So take your pick. All right. Well, we'll have Justin back in the next episode. Go ahead and listen to it. We're going to release them both at the same time. And Josh, tell everyone goodbye.
Yeah, thanks so much for listening. Make sure that you are rate, review, and subscribe on whichever podcast medium that you are following us on. Also, hit us up on Twitter. We really appreciate you joining in the conversation. Give us some of those feedback, thoughts on how you survive and how you become a healthy leader within toxicity. So thank you so much, and we will catch you next episode.